Welcome to Norse Code, episode 116 of the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me this week, as per usual, blogger extraordinaire and football know-it-all in general, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I feel pretty good, but I don't know how I feel about the useful human title being taken away without you even telling me that you were doing it.
Oh, that's true. You remain a useful human. Actually, more useful this week than you've been in weeks past. You've had
as far as you know, maybe a week ago I saved someone's life via CPR, and then what are the two blog posts compared to that?
So given how much of your life you spend on Twitter, I'm fairly certain I would know if that had happened.
That's true. I'd probably Vine it or something.
There would have at least been a link to like the Star Tribune story. Macho Man Randy Savage rises from the dead, pulls two children from river. No, I was speaking purely in terms of your title as a blogger extraordinaire. You were twice as extraordinary as you customarily are, having written two articles of relative import to the Vikings community, given some of the coaching changes that have gone on in the last couple of days. Big week for that all around the league. The carousel spins hard and fast, it seems like.
You make it sound like extremely punishing when all these guys get hired. You're like, oh man, all these hires, such a brutal industry.
We're going to get into it after we thank our listeners for their generous and kind donations and cover a couple of other items of Viking news. But yeah, I think that is a fair assessment of the way that I feel.
All right.
What's going on here?
I don't know what's going on.
James claims that Kamala is coming for me.
Yeah.
That is terrifying.
I'm sorry.
That'll make, again, more sense later in the show. But for now, Norse Code would not exist without the support of our kind and generous listenership. This week, we have two new members of the Norse Code donor family. First of all, Joyce Loser gives us $10 via PayPal. And the kind note, thanks for producing the best Vikings podcast. Aw, thank you for listening. I mean, we always just think of ourselves as number one, but it's good to hear that we're also the best.
Number one in a non-ordinal, non-categorized, non-qualitative system. And then also the best.
Also contributing this week, Soren Hansen becomes a recurring donor, giving us $2 a month via our Patreon page, which is our favorite way for users to, or listeners, I suppose, to join the Norse Code family. I guess you use the knowledge that you gain here, whatever that's worth. But if you believe that it's worth, $25 a year, then we would really appreciate it if you would commit to just giving us a couple of dollars every month, because it makes the budgeting process so much easier. Of course, with a show that's dedicated to football, we see a big spike in listenership and donations, and also the number of episodes we produce, oddly enough, during the football season. And that makes the 8 months a year when it's not really football season a little more complicated to plan for and budget for. So these small monthly contributions go a long way towards making our lives easier and ensuring that you get the best sounding, most interesting, just, best, according to Joyce, Vikings podcast that we can give you. So thank you, Joyce and Soren. And remember, if you would like to join the family of Norse Code donors, just visit our website at norsecodepodcast.com. And at the bottom of the page, you will find links to either our one-time donation page, hosted by PayPal, or our recurring donation page, hosted by Patreon. So be sure to check that out. A couple of small Vikings news items before we, there's really not a whole lot of Viking stuff to talk about. I was thinking we'd do coaching and playoff preview and maybe a mailbag. But Everson Griffin gets to play in the Pro Bowl after J.J. Watt is out injured. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, Everson Griffin is a Pro Bowl quality player, and now he gets to, earn that appellation formally. It's nice. I'm kind of waiting on, two more, but maybe that'll happen. Maybe that won't. But for now, congrats to Everson Griffin, who definitely deserves it.
Also in the news today, Vikings hired a new offensive line coach, former head coach, former tight end coach, former offensive coordinator, and former offensive line coach. He's been in the league for a hot minute. Tony Sparano, who I believe you now know more about than you probably ever wanted to.
Yeah, I actually never, because I thought about a lot of potential coaches. He'd actually never crossed my mind until the rumor showed up, and then he had an interview, and then he was hired, all within like the span of like 2 hours or whatever. No, he was not somebody that I really gave that much thought to, but it makes a lot of sense. He spent some time with Zimmer and all that. Yeah, no, Sperano's been in the league for quite some time. He had uh, he I'm not going to say he had the short end of the stick in Dallas, but he had the back end of everyone remembers the famously good Dallas offensive line. In the mid early '90s. Well, Sperano got to coach the late '90s Dallas line, which wasn't as good. It was still pretty good. And he was able to experience what it was like to coach a guy like Larry Allen. And he also had some experience coaching like Andre Garrod, who I like a lot personally. I think his story is pretty cool. But yeah, he worked under Bill Parcells. He did offensive line coaching in Oakland. He obviously was a head coach in Miami. He was an interim head coach in Oakland as well. And he's been on a lot of different staffs, and has worked under a couple of systems, right? So he's worked under the Norv Turner system. He's worked under the Greg Olson system, which is more of a West Coast offense. And wherever he goes, there's been sort of a consistent theme about the way that he coaches offensive linemen. You hear this about every offensive line coach. It seems to be pretty true, for as much of a cliche and as unmeasurable as it is, that he tends to coach tough slash physical players. And every coach says that, right? Every coach says that we want tough physical players. But it seems like when he arrives in places, like when he arrived in Oakland, I was reading around what Oakland bloggers had to say about him. I was reading around what Miami bloggers had to say about him. And it seems like wherever he goes and he has a reasonable amount of control over the offensive line or the staff as a whole as a head coach, it seems like the players earn a reputation for being tough, which they did not have before. So it seems like this is something that is a pretty consistent theme of his, which is good, right? Because the offensive line, the Vikings have, I wouldn't necessarily call them, weak or anything like that, but they could do with a little less passivity and a little bit more aggressiveness, which is nice. As to whether or not he's a good coach that can develop players, I think that that's sort of up in the air. I think that anecdotally there's a lot of good evidence, and maybe anecdotally there's not as much good evidence. I thought that his successes with Stefan Wisniewski, center for the Oakland Raiders, now for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Donald Penn, left tackle with the Oakland Raiders. I think his successes with those two are pretty demonstrative of the fact that maybe he can coach up some people. He did a pretty good job, identifying Andre Garrod as a center. Bill Parcells did not believe that this person who had played center for Dallas previously did poorly, and then was benched, could be a center in the NFL. He played guard, and then he was replaced at guard, and then under Sperano's coaching, he re-earned the starting center title, despite the fact that they had drafted another center to play that spot, and he earned 5 Pro Bowls after that. So it seems like anecdotally there's some good evidence when you take a look at sort of the statistical evidence that does exist, which isn't very good. It seems like he doesn't really have much of an impact in terms of coaching up people. When you take a look at the staffs that he was on, where he would have a reasonable amount of input on the kind of offensive lineman they want, he's done a very, very, very good job drafting. It seems like the only miss has been Menelik Watson, second-round pick from Florida State. Other than that, he was on the same staff that got Gabe Jackson. He was on the same staff that got Mike Pouncey, that got Jake Long. He brought in through free agency, players like Richie Incognito, who, we know his story, but at least while Sperano was the head coach, nothing sort of flared up there. And the players that they tended to inquire, which actually include Joe Berger, The players that they tended to acquire tended to be players that panned out. He has a really low bust rate in terms of identifying talent, and maybe that is evidence of being able to coach up players. Because the distinction between selecting a good player and finding a player that you can coach up to be good, that seems to be a pretty fine distinction anyway. So that's what I've learned about him from a schematic perspective. It seems like there's a lot more like concrete information that we can take a look at. I've mentioned the show a couple of times. I mentioned in the article that I wrote that the Vikings had, multiple, running schemes. It was, a lot of people would call it a flex blocking offense, except what was interesting about it is that people will very often not identify it as that. They would call it a zone running scheme a lot of the time. And then at other times they would call it, a man blocking scheme. And they did both zone and man blocking. So if you just looked at a couple of plays, maybe you come away, with an understanding of what they do. But it's both. They do both of those things on different plays. They also do what's called gap blocking, which is a little bit different. You're responsible for a gap. And so the technique is a lot like man blocking at times. The rules are a lot like zone at time. For zone blocking, the rules are whether or not you're covered or uncovered. For gap blocking, it's a lot more complicated than that, but still, it's a relatively simple set of rules. And I wouldn't call it a combination of both. It does different things to the running game, but you could think of it that way. And then they also did trap blocking, which for most teams isn't a scheme; it's just a set of plays. But for some teams, trap blocking becomes a scheme, usually at like the D3 college level. Anyway, the Vikings did all four of those things, and so there's not really a transition to quote unquote man blocking, but that's primarily what. Sperano did in Oakland, in Miami, in Dallas. I was able to look at one of the playbooks that Dallas used at that time. The idea is that you're responsible for an individual player on a play as opposed to you have a set of rules that will dictate, if you, block up or block to the side or block to the second level or whatever. And because there's so many different defensive fronts that people will use, man blocking does also become its own set of rules, but it is still, a little bit different. So that's something that the Vikings are used to. Sperano does probably a better job creating better blocking angles than Davidson did. If you take a look at some of the stuff that he did in Oakland, it's actually kind of interesting. It's maybe a little bit more aggressive about the trap game, which, that could be positive or negative because trap blocking, sometimes it's called influence blocking, and what you do is you influence, a defensive player to move in a certain way and then block him from an unexpected direction. I think the term wham block is also used, and sometimes that distinction depends on who's doing the block. It's a trap block if it's an offensive lineman, a wham block if it's a skill player. But that gives you a good idea of what happens, and the Vikings used to do this really successfully against Ndamukong Suh. When he played for the Detroit Lions, they would have an offensive lineman basically not block Ndamukong Suh, basically just let him go. He would run up the gut, and then a pulling lineman or an H-back or whatever would hit him in the ear hole from the side. And, surprise is always good. Creating unusual angles is always good. And being able to not have to fight a player's balance or momentum is always good when you create these blocks. The risks to that are pretty obvious. You're letting Ndamukong Suh go. If you mistime something or if you mistake something or if he knows what you're doing, you're kind of screwed. But they did do a little bit more of that in Oakland, and just in general, the run blocking tended to be a little bit riskier. And so it created some interesting plays, but it also created some, opportunities for the defense. At any rate, I don't think the Vikings will be asking their offensive linemen to do something that they haven't done before. I think the only question is, whether or not Matt Khalil fits within this run blocking scheme, and I think that that's not as important of a question. I think the other four offensive linemen, whether or not those four include Sully and Lodeholt, or if they include, Berger and Clemmings, I think the other offensive linemen fit man blocking to a T, regardless. So, it's both significant in that you're getting rid of someone who clearly wasn't able to do his job for the last couple of years, and Jeff Davidson, and bringing in someone who, maybe you're not hitting a home run with this guy. Maybe you're not hiring Howard Mudd or Dante Scarnecchio or like an offensive line legend. But you're also hiring someone who like notably isn't like a failure or anything like that. And improving the coaching / improving the offensive line from like really bad to pretty average, I think could do a significant amount to how good the offense is. So if the offensive line is average, I think everybody's happy. And if that's all that Coach Sparano can do, I think everybody's happy. And so if you don't take a risk in hiring your offensive line coach, I think that you do more to secure how good the team can be. So those are my thoughts on Sparano. I think that, and they're all detailed a little bit more. There's like videos and diagrams and examples of what I'm talking about, and they go into a lot more detail about what zone blocking is, man blocking is, gap blocking, etc. There's an example of what I mean when I say that his run blocking is riskier in the article too. We'll link that in the show notes. But yeah, I think it's a good hire. I'm just not like blowing a gasket because of it. I'm not like way super excited. Pat Flaherty would have been kind of interesting, the Giants offensive line coach. I have mixed feelings on him, but I think that he is, as old as he is, higher quote-unquote upside as a coach. Or Hudson Hoke. He's like 90, so they probably wouldn't have hired him. But man, he's the guy that came before Sparano in Dallas. He's the guy that created that like offensive line full of Hall of Famers, and he's a legend. And he's the one that fixed Matt Khalil. He was a consultant that came in. I would have lost my shit, but it also wasn't going to happen because he's 90. But yeah, so those are my thoughts.
Nathan Schetzel writes in with a question submitted via email. Has Mike Zimmer completed his Voltron of ex-head coaches, or do you see more changes coming, coaches being hired away or fired in the offseason?
So I think by Voltron, you kind of want, I think you want 5, right? So
I think you need 5 for it to be Voltron. Otherwise, you've just got like the 2 cat arms and the robot head.
You think it's just the arms? It wouldn't be like the legs and the head?
I would like to see a Vikings team that was like rooted in one place punching as opposed to one that could only run away.
And kick, right?
You kind of need your arms to kick, like just to provide counterbalance.
Counterbalance what? You don't have a torso.
Oh, that's right. Just a head on legs.
You're right.
So I think we can all agree that he has not completed Voltron.
Right. Well, there's more to go, but
there's a good question here, though. Like, does Mike Zimmer have like a visible, testable predilection for hiring people who have not only been head coaches, but people that he has worked with before? And if so, who else is coming?
I think that there's a definite bias for familiarity on the staff, and I think that that's undeniable. What with Adam Zimmer and Scott Turner on the staff, with George Edwards on the staff, and then bringing Sparano in, people that he's worked with before. Whether or not that familiarity is good or bad, I think that there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to that. But for sure, we saw familiarity dip into nepotism back with Frazier, and that created some big problems. I mean, like, what was Singletary doing on the staff, right? But one of the big problems there was that they had a bunch of different coaching styles, and that was weird, and it didn't mesh together. And so I don't think you have this, and I think Sparano has a very, very similar coaching style to Zimmer. And so you probably won't have that kind of problem, but like maybe you're not doing enough to find the best possible talent and put them in positions to help your team is probably the drawback. As for getting other head coaches, like I don't think they're going to be getting rid of any more coaches. Any coaches that they would have gotten rid of by now. I think that by the time maybe there's a run with the Vikings ends, we might see some more head coaches, but I don't know where they would be. I think a lot of people are like, oh no, wide receiver coach George Stewart, what's happening with him? We talked about that on the previous show. Why he's still on the team, but if he ends up being ousted at the end of next year or something like that, I don't think there's a lot of people who are head coaches that would be wide receiver coaches. They tend to be like quarterback coaches. They tend to be offensive line coaches. Sometimes linebacker coaches. But you're probably not going to find another head coach. So I don't think we'll get a 5 head coach Voltron. But it would be it's interesting to speculate. Now they might be able to get. Probably won't be able to get a special teams coach, but I do know that Mike Prefer has interviewed or has been rumored to have interviewed or something for head coaching positions before. So that's close. It's close to a Voltron.
Voltron-esque.
Voltron-esque.
More like a GoBot than Voltron. Although I guess the GoBot's really more like Transformers.
Well, they were Transformer ripoffs, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't say more like, Megazord or Power Ranger Dinosaur or whatever, because that doesn't feel as much of a downgrade as a GoBot was versus a Transformer. At any rate,
exactly. Some might consider that an upgrade. At any rate, not Voltron. 4 head coaching vacancies filled today. A very busy afternoon for NFL Twitter.
That was intense.
The Giants promoted Ben McAdoo to head coach, which kind of sucks for Tom Coughlin now, in retrospect, now that we can kind of see how this whole thing was shaking out. It was nice that they gave him the opportunity to resign, but I wonder if they gave him a choice to have all the blame for the failure of the last couple of years placed on his shoulders before just promoting somebody else that was going to run the same system.
Yeah, so there's actually an interesting contrast. I think it was Ben Natan or Nathan or whatever, who I follow on Twitter. He's a member of Draft Twitter. He's an Eagles fan. He has a Calvin avatar from Calvin and Hobbes. Cool guy. I think he's the one that made this observation, and if not, it was a member of Draft Twitter. It's kind of interesting. It made sense to fire Lovey and promote Dirk Ketter because you really like that offense, and you want to keep the offensive staff together, and Dirk Ketter did some good things. The defense kind of needed to go, and they're going to figure out sort of what's happening on the defensive side there. But with Tom Coughlin, all they did is promote Ben McAdoo up. They're keeping basically all the same staff. It's going to be difficult for Coughlin to take a job. In fact, there's a rumor going around that he didn't interview for a job once he realized that he wouldn't be able to take any of his staff from New York with him. And so, what are you doing there? Because, the offense with the Giants was, fine, but you're keeping all the same staff. For a person who you were you and everything that you're responsible for, which includes your staff, did poorly. Please resign because we have too much respect for you to fire you. Also, if we had severance pay, that means we wouldn't have to pay you severance pay. But yeah, so that's weird. So the Dirk Ketter thing in Tampa Bay makes more sense because everything that was wrong was basically on the defensive side of the ball. But with the New York Giants, I think promoting Ben, just getting rid of Coughlin just to promote Ben McAdoo and keep basically all the same staff, meh. I guess they were probably scared of losing McAdoo, but meh.
Well, now it seems like unless they make a bunch of other changes, they've functionally consigned themselves to more of the same.
Right? Well, they are bringing in Joe Philbin as the offensive coordinator, which I don't know how I feel about that. It is kind of weird because Philbin was McAdoo's boss functionally. He was the offensive coordinator. McAdoo was the quarterback's coach in Green Bay. Now the tables have turned.
The most, I think, headline-grabbing hire of the day, Chip Kelly to the 49ers.
Easily the most headline-grabbing hire of the day. That is going to be so interesting to me because Chip Kelly doesn't work well with people. I think that's pretty established at this point. Despite being a head coach, despite being a coach at all, a person who teaches people, he does not work well with people. He likes having a lot of control, and he was not on the same page with a bunch of things that were happening in the personnel office, and that created some tension. The reason that Jed York and Trent Baalke got rid of Jim Harbaugh was, officially it's because he didn't win a Super Bowl, which is so dumb. But the real reason was either a power struggle or a personality conflict or probably both. And so, Trent Baalke, Jed York did not get along with Jim Harbaugh. Rumors have been going around that it's been difficult to find people to get to the San Francisco job, including someone who took a job somewhere else. We'll mention that in a second, who was probably the hottest head coaching candidate on the market. Decided not to go to San Francisco, according to rumor, based off of the amount of not just control that he would have, but just in general the relationship that you would have with York and Baalke. Now, that rumor might not actually be true. That might just be fueled by our perception of Balky because San Francisco never offered this person a job. So, who knows? But in a front office versus personality conflicts and full of ego, hiring Chip Kelly seems like it could be the wrong move. But, people are pretty excited because, hey, a lot of coaches who got second chances did pretty well in the second chance. Some guy who didn't get along well with people but was a defensive genius. I think his name is Bill Belichick. Did pretty well with his second chance. Pete Carroll
Belichick, who's he?
Well, he's an obscure coach. You've never heard of him.
Some bastard with one eye.
Yeah, I got the T-shirt first. Pete Carroll did pretty well in his third chance. I think he did all right. So giving Chip Kelly a second chance, learn from his failures, maybe reduce the opportunities for failure by not giving him personnel control. I mean, a lot of good things can happen, and obviously I think that he's a really, really smart offensive mind. I think that the way that the 49ers have embraced analytics and the way that he thinks about football do mesh well together, so there are some things that they probably agree on. They're both very into sports science, which is a part of analytics. And so, there's a lot of things that could come together, including something that somebody asked in our mailbag about is Colin Kaepernick, a quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers. We don't know if he's the quarterback because of Blaine Gabbert or the draft, but people are pretty excited about what a potential fit between, Colin Kaepernick and Chip Kelly. Let's see.
So, do you get the impression that Jed York and Chip Kelly were like shaking hands, finalizing the deal, each thinking to themselves, as soon as I can get this guy to see things my way, good things will happen?
I bet. as everything is here, as soon as I can just convince this stubborn bastard that I'm right.
As soon as I can get Jed York to leave me alone, then I can finally do something great with a team. And meanwhile, York is thinking, as soon as I can beat this guy down and break his spirit, we'll have the benefits of better sleep patterns and smoothies and more talent.
Okay, so I found the question. It's
it's from Kimberly Lipon, who writes
at Val Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Yeah.
Twitter handle.
Yeah.
I've heard some people say that Cap will thrive in a Kelly offense. Explain why? I don't know much about it.
So I think it's actually relatively simplistic analysis. I don't think that he fits. But the reason is, and part of it is because of the fact that Chip Kelly wanted to trade for Kaepernick to see if he was available. Evidently, this has been confirmed by multiple people. But the reason is because he's an extremely good running quarterback, and it's not just that he's good at running. I mean, like Vic is good at running, but it's that he's good at the way running quarterbacks are used in the Chip Kelly offense, which includes not just read options, but mesh handoffs and mesh reading and making sure that you can make quick decisions based off of those reads in either the passing or the running game. Colin Kaepernick, pistol offense, Nevada, did a lot of that and optioned out of runs into passes into screens and stuff like that. It's a system that he's very, very used to. It's a little bit different because, a zone read is different than what the pistol offense did, which is, downhill power running or man blocking, which we just talked about. But for the most part, that's not as relevant to Cap. I don't think that he's necessarily a fit. The kind of quarterbacks that Chip Kelly has pursued, especially in the NFL, but even at the college level, have all been very accurate in the short game, have been consistently pretty good at getting the ball out from 0 to 5 yards, even 5 to 10 yards, and exhibit to some degree, touch. But it's a screen game with a couple of long bombs. It's a short passing game and a running game, and a running quarterback complements it beautifully, which is why I think a lot of people were talking about Kaepernick, who is maybe the fastest runner at the quarterback position in the NFL. Certainly not as beautiful as Cam or Russell, and maybe not as good as Cam, Russell, or Johnny, but maybe the fastest straight line guy. Who I think he set FBS records at Nevada with his combined passing and running. So Yeah, I think that's maybe a reason is because he's used to an option offense. He's a good running quarterback, but I think that he's not necessarily a good fit. I think that the fact that, despite the fact that Blaine Gabbert doesn't really run the ball, he might actually be a better fit in the same way that Nick Foles thrived for a year in the offense, in the same way that people thought, including Chip Kelly, thought that Sam Bradford would be a good fit. So that's why they're saying it. I don't know if I buy it. I could see them like drafting like Jared Goff or whoever.
Doug Peterson ends up in Philadelphia. Andy Reid, having done fairly well there, they decided to go in a different direction, and then went back to the coaching tree that gave them moderate success really a few years ago.
So this is interesting to me because the rumor is, and I don't know if it's a rumor because it's like a Fox Philadelphia guy reporting it. So in theory, he's got sources that have confirmed it, but the rumor is that they're hiring Brad Childress as their offensive coordinator, which means they're getting two former Andy Reid assistants who, between the two of them, collectively have 1 year of offensive play calling, and that's Brad Childress from 2006 with the Vikings when he was the head coach. So Peterson is the head coach, Brad Childress as the offensive coordinator, both former Andy Reid disciples. Kind of weird of Philadelphia to, I don't want to say admit their mistake because maybe this guy is better than the person he was working under, but it's still kind of weird for them to be like, Andy Reid, you suck. But if we could have your underlings 4 years later, that would be great. But yeah, I don't.
That's my question about all this: is how much of it is ownership in Philadelphia looking over at Kansas City and seeing Andy Reid go into the playoffs again. Filled with regret. Doug Peterson is the only person with no head coaching experience hired today, correct?
Yes, I think so, right? Because no, Dirk Ketter was hired today in Tampa Bay.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I guess we knew about the Ketter thing as soon as Smith was on his way out.
It's true. It was just kind of like confirmed today, so. I'm going to look up Dirk Ketter real quick. So he has college head coaching experience.
Okay.
Arizona State, Boise State.
Well, and Peterson technically isn't hired until the end of the Kansas City season.
That's true.
Which is ongoing. So
right. Ongoing.
But they're done interviewing in Philadelphia. So.
Right. But yeah, he's had a pretty short coaching career. It's like 6-7 years, but he was like a quality control assistant in Philadelphia, quarterback's coach for like a year, and then became the offensive coordinator with Andy Reid in Kansas City. Former Bret Favre backup, told a lot of pretty good stories about Bret Favre, none of which I can remember off the top of my head. Really, really good friends with Favre, which makes me hope that they bring in Bret Favre as a quarterback's coach. 0.1% chance, maybe, right? 1 out of 1,000, right? But it would be awesome and hilarious, and I can't even imagine Bret Favre as a coach. How could he coach? He just had a feel for the game. He didn't understand mechanics. He didn't much care for that. He didn't even much care for, defenses and reading them. So the idea of him as a quarterback's coach, fills my heart with joy. And hopefully that's what happens. But it also means, if that happens, it also means that Bret Favre, the quarterback's coach, will have more experience calling plays, both as a quarterback under Brad Childress refusing to listen to him and Darrell Bevell, and as an offensive coordinator for a high school, will have more experience calling plays than either Doug Peterson or Brad Childress.
And he will be the only coach to coach during practice and training camp while wearing jeans.
If he chooses to wear pants at all that day. But if he does, they're Wranglers.
Indeed. We do know of his affinity for leaving pants on the ground.
And then, it'll be great is if they adopted an anti-sports science approach as a result of Bret Favre being on the staff. Everybody gets, copper fit and tough razors and Wranglers, which I believe is anti-sports science.
They start doing like Korean-style toughening exercises where like they'll have to like run full strength into a wall so that they can take hits and start as many consecutive games as Bret Favre did because that's the only way he knows how to succeed.
They'll replace all the protein shakes and smoothies that Chip Kelly had with Bret Favre's piss.
It'll just be like sand. That'd be great. Tej with one of those doofy multi-language character smiley faces at TJ Polson on Twitter writes us, "Who in God's name are the Titans going to hire? And will the Lions fire Jim Caldwell?" Well, it sounds like Mike Mularkey has been given, quote, strong indications he'll be the next head coach in Tennessee. So
Yeah, so the
there's
interim
that.
head coach stays, I suppose, which actually surprisingly often is a bad idea. I think Ben Albright at Benjamin Albright NFL, I think, or at Ben Albright NFL, has gone through like the history of interim head coaches, and they tend to not work out. I mean, they include people that we're familiar with, and maybe it's our memory is slanted to remember bad examples, but Leslie Frazier, Mike Singletary, um, Ed Orgeron at USC. But yeah, no, I guess the interim head coach is maybe slated to be a favorite. If not, it could have been Terrell Austin, who was the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. Extremely good defensive coordinator. I would love to see him out of the division. But it sounds like that's not going to happen. Mike Mularkey, by the way, if people don't know, was on the Vikings roster for 7 years. Did not crack 200 yards once as a tight end. That's okay. And then coached at the Concordia University in St. Paul. So sort of Minnesota ties,
Go Coppers.
Well, no, that's Concordia Moorhead, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The other Concordia.
The St. Paul Concordia.
Okay. Let's see here. Doug Marrone interviewed in Tennessee, but probably not going to get a job despite being interviewed a bunch of times.
Which is so hilarious because he quit his Buffalo job. Right? Like, he had an option, I think, or he had an extension, and he just quit his Buffalo job. Thought he was going to be a head coaching candidate based on the job that he did in Buffalo. Shopped around. Nobody trusted him because he just friggin' quit on a team, became the offensive line coach of the Jaguars. So, good job, dude.
Didn't he leave some money on the table when he left Buffalo all of a sudden?
No, I think he actually made more. Well, if he had been hired as a head coach somewhere else, I think he would have made more money because I think the way the contract was structured, he was able to take like the next 2 years' salary. So he had an immense amount of guaranteed money that was supposed to be paid out over the life of the contract that he was able to just take despite quitting and then earn that money on top of whatever money he'd expected to earn as a head coach.
No, he's never getting hired.
Yeah, right?
after doing that, if he ever does get hired to be a head coach somewhere, there will be almost no guaranteed money. It will all be performance based. Because that, I imagine owners do not appreciate being treated like rubes.
Exactly.
So it looks like all these guys, including Marrone, sort of feel the same way.
We didn't talk about Hugh Jackson over in Cleveland.
Oh, that's true. Well, I mean, he was not hired today. I think it was yesterday. But yeah, Hugh Jackson, now coach of the Browns, for whatever that's worth.
Well, I think, for what it's worth, I think you're right for what it's worth. But I think that's a great hire. I like him a lot. I thought he did a good job with the Raiders. Shouldn't have been fired.
Yeah, and he seemed like maybe the most talented coach with the most tread left on his tires, left as kind of a victim of the 2015 season. So
yeah, hopefully he gets
land on his feet.
More than 2 years. But yeah, no, he's he's got a lot of experience both as an offensive coordinator and as not a ton of experience as a head coach, but he's got good experience as a head coach. Yeah, no, in his time as an offensive coordinator and running backs coach in Cincinnati was really, really, really successful. He's a smart dude. Yeah, so I think that's a good hire. It's just, who knows if you can get anything done in Cleveland with having, you only have like a 1 to 2 year life. I mean, because over the last 7 years, they've had like 4 coaches. So getting rid of coaches that quickly, who knows if he's going to have enough security. And then also he still has the same front office that Cleveland has, the one that whiffed on Johnny Manziel and then somehow whiffed even more in the same draft on the earlier pick, Justin Gilbert. So that's the front office he gets to work with. But I guess they hired a baseball stats guy, so maybe it'll be good now.
Well, and I love how he's been the head coach for 24 hours, and there's already rumors that he doesn't want Johnny Manziel.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I love that. That's like drama city. Maybe this is mean, and I don't really particularly dislike Cleveland fans or anything like that, but it's just so fun to see Cleveland blow up because it just feels like, yes, this makes sense. And, I remember having all the drama of the 2009-2010 seasons, and now you have Johnny. We had a drunk Bret Favre, but you have a drunk Johnny, and I would take, one drunk Bret Favre over 10 drunk Johnnies.
Well, 10 drunk Johnnies are just as good as no drunk Johnnies to the Browns, it turns out.
Well, it's a significant degree worse than no.
That's true. No drunk Johnnies are not a PR liability.
Right.
I guess that would be the difference. I would say our ranking last week of teams and potential coaching vacancies was correct.
Yours more than mine, because you put, I think, Tennessee last.
Tennessee definitely near the bottom. Luckily, having won 5 games in 2 years, they have elected to go with more of the same. Although it will be hard for Malarkey to do worse than the previous staff. And plus they have, a new GM, so they're kind of cleaning out the front office a little bit. Another team that has gone through, a somewhat more complete front office cleanup has been the Detroit Lions. And miraculously, Jim Caldwell still has his job. Do you think that changes at any point this offseason, or are they going to stick with him after they... Because it really seemed like once ownership kind of sorted itself out and the front office cleaned house, Caldwell was able to kind of wake them up again after Thanksgiving, and Detroit went on to win, I think, all but one of their games in pretty spectacular fashion. Not against the best of opponents, but still, it was... if he was playing for his job, then I think he made a pretty good argument.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit worried, though. I think that it's kind of, even though he's not actually an interim coach, I feel like it's kind of like the interim coach effect, where players tend to just play a little bit better after that happens. I mean, we saw that happen with Dan Campbell in Miami, where there were a couple of games where they were just freaking phenomenal. They were a great team. They could have taken on anybody, and in fact did. But that kind of dropped off. I don't know that, Jim Caldwell has proven that he should stay. I mean, he did get that 10-win season, admittedly with better talent, but he did get that 10-win season. I guess it remains to be seen if he can get more, but I don't know. I felt like after they cleaned house with the front office, they cleaned house with the offensive staff, they really should have maybe gotten rid of Jim Caldwell and just promoted Terrell Austin and let him do whatever he wanted. So yeah, I was surprised, but I guess we'll see if it works out. I expect the Lions to do better this year than they did last year. I think the division's going to be really, really tough. What with the Packers probably not being weird and bad, and the Lions getting better, and I guess the Bears are going to get worse. So that's nice. But other than that, tough division.
That about covers it, right? We got. What about poor Mike Shanahan? Is he done?
Oh, poor Red Mike.
Rude.
Well, he's got a red face.
It's true, he does. Very red. Well, not as red as Tom Coughlin's face, but
yes. Well, the fraternity of old white coaches with red faces is strong with Mike Zimmer and Tom Coughlin and Mike Shanahan. Yeah, he might be done. I mean, did he get a call? Did anyone?
I think he was on the short list for Philadelphia.
I had heard he was kind of on the short list for Tampa Bay, but I think
not. I think we're both wrong. I think it was San Francisco.
Oh, really? They chose Chip over him?
Right?
Well, I guess I would choose Chip over him too, but I think that's an indication to Mike, like, well, that's probably it. Unless he takes the job in Tennessee, even though it has been soft promised to interim coach / tight end coach Mike Mularkey. Which, yeah, I guess if they're choosing Mike Mularkey above potentially getting, Mike Shanahan to work with, Marcus Mariota, Yeah, well, yeah, that's probably it.
Shanahan, Slayer of Griffins.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Uh, According to the Greg Rosenthal article at NFL.com that we'll have linked in the show notes, Shanahan, meanwhile, was reportedly close to getting the 49ers job. So there you go. I
Like
guess
how close? I mean, I don't know. Maybe the article doesn't say it all, but like, I kind of want to know what close means. Like
right. I would like to be
negotiations
privy
broke
to that
down,
background
or
discussion. Like, was it
right?
was it a question of who wanted more money? Was it a question of like what Jed York had for breakfast that day? Like what?
Maybe it's personnel control. Which, like, I don't know why you'd interview for the 49ers job expecting any personnel control at all.
Yeah,
But
we've been over that. I think we both agreed that we didn't really want that job because it wouldn't really be our team.
right, exactly, and it's still a relatively attractive team. But it was a reason it was like not in the top half of our team power rankings. What was number one?
Number one, what?
Team for the team available for.
Well, for me, for winning the Super Bowl, Giants. Otherwise, Eagles. Just
Oh
in terms
yeah,
of like young
yeah,
talent
yeah. All right.
and relative completeness. Final note from the fast spinning coaching carousel. Uh, Colin Kaepernick jerseys are no longer on clearance
I
at
noticed
NFL.com
that. That was
outlets.
hilarious.
Nobody wants to get. Well, too many people might be seeking bargains on Kaepernick jerseys, but it is a Chip Kelly offense, so don't.
My guess is eBay and Alibaba jerseys are still mispriced, so you could probably get some of those.
Those are all available at such a hilarious discount that all you have to do is really just kind of inspect the image for relative
For obvious
approximation
flaws, right?
of the actual uniform. Yeah, exactly. Make sure the name you want is spelled correctly, and
Right. Make
that
sure the uniform is like red instead of purple.
like
Like,
brick
what is
or
this
purple.
Kaepernick 7 jersey doing in purple?
We do have one more coaching related question before we close the book on this segment. Uh, Brendan White at Brendan 8-bit, but like ATE 8-bit,
Yes.
writes us, will Sperano replace Norb if he falters again next season?
Probably
It's kind of an odd
not.
question. No, I would be my instinct. It
So
just seems
this is
like they'd have such different like responsibilities.
well. I mean, we've seen offensive line coordinators take offensive line coaches take offensive coordinator jobs, like Mike Tice. And it's happened around the league every so often, so it's not like impossible. But the thing I'm most curious about, and this is a discussion I saw, it was either in the open thread of the Daily Norseman recently, or it was in another thread of the Daily Norseman. But they were talking about Scott Turner, who he's never called a play, but at some point you have to promote somebody to call plays who hasn't called play before. Promoting Scott Turner. Who, some people were maybe a little bit upset that he's even on the staff because it strikes us of nepotism for some reason somehow. But Scott Turner, I believe, has been on non-Norv Turner staffs and has been well recommended. I'm going to do a quick Google search right now on that. This is a different Scott Turner. Who is this? Texas State representative for the 33rd District. Probably not a
Probably not
good
him.
football coach. Also, I remember seeing Scott Turner, and he wasn't black, so it's probably not the same guy. Okay, let's see. So, Scott Turner led Bridgewater to the best season for QB in rookie history. Okay. So it was a wide receiver coach in Cleveland, obviously under Norv. Worked in Carolina as an offensive quality control coach in 2011. Worked for Chudzinski. Worked closely with the QBs. I don't know. Offensive quality control coach doesn't really mean anything. Has worked at the University of Pittsburgh as an offensive assistant and as a wide receiver coach. Worked with Jonathan Baldwin. That's actually not good. Taking a look at... Has he done anything? Maybe don't promote
Jonathan
this guy.
Baldwin?
No, not Jonathan Baldwin. I know he hasn't done anything.
No.
What did he do in 2012? Why is there this gap? 2011, offensive quality control coach at the Panthers. 2012, nothing? Question mark. 2013 wide receiver coach for Norv Turner. So I guess he has only worked on. Maybe I was confusing him with Adam Zimmer, who has worked a lot of places without Mike Zimmer. Who knows? Sperano could potentially replace Norv. It's happened before, where offensive line coaches take the OC job. But yeah, I don't really see it happening.
Well, all right, let's talk playoffs.
Wow.
So playoffs. So there was some controversy as to whether or not Rob Gronkowski had received an epidural steroid knee injection today. Some reports say he did. The Patriots are saying he did not. At any rate, Gronk was in the hospital today and had a back injury added to the injury report to go alongside his existing knee injury. Did not practice. I imagine the Patriots really want him to practice very badly in the next couple of days so that he can play on Sunday, but it wouldn't surprise me if his status was listed as questionable and or doubtful, and then he did not play on Sunday. Does that make it impossible for New England to advance, or just very, very difficult?
What do we know about Julian Edelman's health situation? I think that if you're missing both Gronk and Edelman, I think
you're boned.
Yeah, I think you're boned. But I think if you have Edelman and like Amendola and Scott Chandler and Tom Brady, I think he's pretty good. Probably do something. Do we know about Edelman?
I'm looking right now. It's all Gronk all day.
All Gronk all day. Well, I'm going to go to rotoworld.com.
Edelman was a limited participant in practice today.
Okay, well, let's see what the reports have to say about what reporters think about whether or not he'll play. Fully expected to return from a 7-game absence for the divisional round, with Gronk ailing. Edelman could be Tom Brady's number one option against the Chiefs. Chiefs got a great defense, obviously. They've got a surprisingly good offense. But it's the Patriots, so I think, what is it? What's the line? KC 5 or something like that?
I had it here just a second ago.
This is like your job, right?
Yeah, it opened at 5 and now it's 4.5.
Okay.
So yeah, about that.
I'm certainly picking New England to cover the spread. New
England 5.
New England 5? Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm definitely taking Kansas City. Wow.
Yeah, I'm taking Kansas City against the spread for sure, but I think I would still. I think I still roll with New England. I think the home field thing is pretty significant. Is Chandler Jones is out, right? Because of the K2? Okay.
Nope, he actually was a limited participant in practice, and I lied.
So he showed up to the cops like high as hell praying. People keep on calling it synthetic weed. I think that's
Wizard Smoke.
Bad name for it. Wizard Smoke.
That's like one of the brand names of it, and I don't understand the allure of synthetic weed. It seems to me like those kids that are.
I mean, you live in a state where real weed is legal, so.
Well, yeah, but still, you remember when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, and the sketchy kids in your grade are starting to smoke cigarettes. And then there's those couple of kids that smoke herbal cigarettes because they want to seem like they're cool and tough enough to smoke, but they
like the cloves,
for whatever reason. Yeah, exactly. Or like the actual green herbal cigarettes that just, kind of smell like weed but don't really do anything, don't even make you dizzy like fake weed does. I mean, I get that he's got a drug test to pass or whatever, but it just strikes me as that just something quintessentially
does not have that many drug tests to pass. It's still kind of surprising. I guess I especially don't understand it in his situation just because, the two biggest appeals of synthetic weed are that it's a lot cheaper and that it's legal. And, I don't see why that should matter for Chandler Jones.
Exactly. He should have somebody who is willing to get him weed. It's the cost issue should not be, a thing. And it just seems just lame. What a loser. I don't want to hang out with that guy. He doesn't know how to have fun.
Maybe he really knows how to have fun, but it's the playoffs. Maybe he knows how to have the most fun. but it's
So
the
if New
playoffs.
England wins this game, they're pretty much going to coast to the Super Bowl, right?
Right, well, because they're going to be up against the winner of the Pittsburgh-Denver game. Yeah, I think it's going to be the weakest New England team we'll see in the Super Bowl. But yeah,
But they'll dismantle either Pittsburgh or Denver. What about Kansas City? Denver performed very poorly against them, and assuming that Antonio Brown does not return, they'll still be in the same Pittsburgh. Rather, will still be in the same situation they're in this week with maybe 50% of Big Ben, and then the Landry Jones show with without the best receiver in the league and without one of the best running backs in the league to kind of build an offense around.
well, so if Pittsburgh somehow wins against Denver, right, they will have Brown and Williams both back, right?
I suppose he'll be. I suppose Brown will be done with concussion protocol.
Yeah,
By
he'll be
then.
done with the concussion protocol. I'm more interested actually in D'Angelo Williams, um, but I guess I don't know. So if they have Brown and Williams back and Big Ben's shoulder reconnects to the rest of his torso, yeah, I mean I see them crushing Kansas City. But this week, they have to beat Denver first. And why don't we just transition to talking about that game real quick?
Yeah, can they do that? I
Can they
mean,
beat Denver? I don't think so. I think that Denver. Let's see. I think Denver is a pretty heavy favorite. I'm not looking at it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were like a touchdown favorite.
you are exactly correct.
Oh, all right, go me. I would. It's Peyton Manning, but we don't know if like his foot is healed, if that was the real issue, and if ribs have healed, and if that was the real issue, or if he was just crappy and then he also had these injuries. So that's obviously the biggest question mark. Brock Osweiler is not that good, and he's been hidden actually in terms of how good he is, but he's not very good at audibles. He's not very good at touch. He's not very good at a lot of things. But whether or not Peyton Manning's better, that's a good question. But that defense is so good, I love it. That yeah, I think Pittsburgh, which doesn't have a defense. I mean, I believe they field 11 players, but I do not believe those 11 players do much. Suddenly, if they don't have Antonio Brown or D'Angelo Williams and Big Ben is injured and can't throw more than 5 yards, it's like, why even attempt to break down the rest of the game? I mean, Von Miller is going to separate the other shoulder, which I guess that's the shoulder you want separated.
But not if the other one already is, I guess.
Yeah,
Not that
I mean,
it would bother Big Ben one way or the other.
It seemingly doesn't really bother him because he characterizes it. Oh, it's just a pain issue, and it's like, what?
Football.
But yeah, he couldn't throw. He probably can throw now, but I don't know. I just see Von Miller maybe not ending Big Ben's career or anything like that, but certainly making Big Ben feel like he's injured for the first time in his injury-riddled life.
I believe that is accurate, and then I will set the over/under at Aqib Talib picks on Landry Jones at 4.
Yeah, so
absolute domination of a quarterback who cannot throw.
So my dream scenario, I think, is because everyone who listens to the podcast, I think, knows this, and certainly most people who follow me on Twitter know this. I'm such a huge Peyton Manning fan. My dream scenario is him getting the ring that he doesn't deserve to make up for all the rings that he didn't get when he did deserve it and the defense failed him. So this would make me both really happy and also it would be hilarious.
So in some sort of like measure of poetic justice, he manages to lead the Broncos most of the way to the Super Bowl.
Lead is a very strong term.
Well,
he manages to be there in a leadership position, for sure.
Well, because realistically, if Denver, goes all the way, it will be because of a combination of Peyton Manning, calling audibles and throwing screen passes, basically,
right.
and
C.J. Anderson balling out and some defensive scores.
Yeah, maybe one like weird long touchdown from Ronnie Hillman, and then Brock Osweiler occasionally being given the keys to the car and within explicit instructions from Uncle Kubiak to not crash it.
Right. It's like, okay, we're gonna throw it deep on 2 of the next 3 plays. Please do so with all of your ability, and then we're gonna put Peyton back in.
Well, and then they'll cobble together an offense from that basically, but then they will all ride on the shoulders of this amazing defense, which has probably never happened to Peyton Manning in his career. So that would be a small dose of poetic justice, I think.
His defense in the playoffs, because it was fully healthy in 2006, was pretty. I mean, I'm not going to compare it to this Denver defense, but it was really good. Bob Sanders was healthy. I think that if Bob Sanders had been able to have like a career where he was fully healthy, I mean, he was basically defensive Percy Harvin, but not crazy. I mean, he would be in the Hall of Fame. He was that good. I mean, he was in the Ed Reed class of safety. And then you had Freeney and Mathis both sort of in their prime. You had a pretty good Tampa 2 middle linebacker. I forgot his name, but he's like a converted safety, kind of like Urlacher. Not obviously as good as Urlacher. And I think he had a good corner or two. So that was a pretty good defense. That's the one they won. That's the one where they somehow managed to luck into having to play Rex Grossman in the Super Bowl. So, yeah.
That was when Rex Grossman was fighting injury the first time, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So, speaking of the NFC, Seattle and Carolina are the closest match line-wise. Lines everywhere from Carolina by 3 to Carolina by 1.
Really? 1? Well, I'm going to take Seattle outright, so I'd take any of those lines. But by 3, I would totally take that line. Wow.
Really? Even in Carolina?
Yeah, I think Seattle's a better team. I think that the fact that Carolina went 15-1 is indicative of how good a team they are, but I don't think it is fully indicative of how good they are. So Carolina is the exact example of a team who I get really annoyed when people say they're not as good as their record. And I remember this happening to the 9-0 Kansas City Chiefs. It happened to our Vikings this year at various points in the season. It happened to the Carolina Panthers this season, where people are like, well, they're undefeated, but they're not that good. And it's like, well, you have to qualify that phrase a lot, because in order for you to get to 9-0, in order for you to get to 14-0, in order for you to, be whatever the Vikings were when people were talking about how they weren't as good as their record, you still have to be good. You still have to be like a top 5, top 7 team. And so this disbelief about how good this team is like, I don't want to say disingenuous, but it's like you're unnecessarily trashing a team for being not as good as an undefeated team, which there's only been one team who, or two teams, I want to say, in recent history who were as good as their undefeated record at that point in the season, and that was probably the 2009 Saints or 2011 Saints? 2011 Saints, I think, and the 2007 Patriots. They were both as good as their undefeated record.
2013 Broncos?
Yeah, they were pretty good, I guess.
They were okay. Super Bowl notwithstanding.
Super Bowl. Yeah, okay, yeah. So no, yeah, exactly. So 2013 Broncos. And so you get all these other teams that are like undefeated at the halfway mark that are not as good as their record, but they're obviously still very good. So who cares? So I'd been defending them in my head, on Twitter, in the podcast, but mostly in my head because I just kind of roll my eyes. But this is that situation when it finally comes up, when you're a team that's not as good as your record, and then you're up against a team that is significantly better than their record. Obviously, you're playing at home. That's a big advantage. Not as big of an advantage as Minnesota's cold field advantage. But I think that all of the indicators that point to a team being potentially fluky are ones that I talked about in the first article that I wrote this week, which was the value of moral victories. And one of the things that I looked at are what are the things that help us predict next season performance that we can take away from. Because fans talk about this all the time, like, oh my God, if games were only 59 minutes and 58 seconds long, we would have this record, right? Does that bear out? Like, is that a good indicator of a quality for a team or whatever? Close game record. Oh, the Vikings were like 1-7 or whatever in close games last year, and oh my God, they're much better than this. The fact that they were in so many close games is a better indicator of who they are than their record. And fans will say it a lot of times. So we want to see, if that holds out. And Carolina is one of those teams. Their close game record is obscene. I didn't prepare for the show at all. I'm gonna pull up that piece right now because it has Carolina's it has Carolina's close game record in it. Let's see, Vikings and the Valley of Moral Victory. I just like that title a lot. I'm like way too proud of it. You ever have that where like you think something's like much more clever than it actually is, and so you just keep on, hounding on it?
I have never felt that way about anything.
Okay, so all the time. Carolina they're +6 in close games. So I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think they were like 7-1 in close games this season or something like that. So they're +6 in close games. So that's a good example of a team that is probably not as good as a record. Seattle, -3 in close games. So, +1 now. So that's one indication. Turnover ratio is a good indication. Teams can consistently produce positive turnover ratios when they're good and consistently produce negative turnover ratios when they're bad. But at the extremes, you have to watch out. Carolina has the top turnover ratio in the league. And ratio obviously is a term of art here. It's actually difference, not a ratio. But they're +16, and that's the most in the league. So that's something that you have to watch out for.
That's got to be it. There's got to be some fumble luck involved there.
Well, I actually looked at fumble luck too. They are helped by fumble luck, but they're not one of the top 3 teams in terms of being helped by fumble luck. Interestingly, the Vikings, who Football Outsiders criticized, maybe not criticized, but pointed out in their piece about how the Vikings aren't as good as the record, did indicate that the Vikings had an unsustainably high rate of fumble recovery, and halfway through the season, the Vikings were at like 72%. So that's true. They insanely high. But the Vikings at the end of the year had a fumble recovery rate of 53.3%. So that evened out and then some, really, in the second half of the season. Right. And then Carolina is their defense has been helped out by the fact that there haven't been fluky scores given up. So the teams that are most helped by the fact that fluky scores haven't hurt them: Carolina, Indianapolis, Arizona, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh. And this is the part of the article where I indicated that this is probably the only evidence that we have that Minnesota was artificially helped by things like luck. So Carolina's strength of opponent-adjusted point differential, their DVOA, their turnover ratio, their non-defensive points given up, and their close game record are all indications that the fact that they're 15-1 is not a good indication of who they are as a team. They're probably, and obviously this still means they're a good team, they're probably a 12-4 team or a 13-3 team. And Seattle, they're probably, what are they, like a 9-7 team going into the playoffs? They're probably also a 12-4 team or a 13-3 team. But I think that they're better than Carolina in a lot of ways. I think they match up really well. I think it's going to be really, really difficult for Carolina to run on them. The Seattle is one of the few teams that's really, really well equipped to deal with the kind of rushing attack that Carolina has, both from Jonathan Stewart and from Cam Newton. And then also, I feel bad for the receivers that Cam Newton has. On the other side of the ball, I think that Seattle has one of the better offenses in the NFL. People don't kind of acknowledge it, but they do. Russell Wilson is phenomenal. I mean, we saw one of Wilson's worst games of the second half of the year, and we were still stunned at some of the things that he did when he couldn't feel his hands. He's had a phenomenal second half of the year, and I think that he's going to continue that against Carolina. It's not going to be as good as he was against like Pittsburgh or whatever, but it's going to be better than he was against the Vikings, and I just think that Seattle is going to win straight up, even on the road.
Seattle has the benefit of Marshawn Lynch, most likely this week, and another interesting thing to note is that if you look at the injury reports as they exist today for all the divisional playoff games, at least a dozen players from both teams in 3 of the games were limited participants in practice. Whereas in terms of the Seahawks and Panthers game, Michael Bennett did not practice for Seattle, and Fozzie Whitaker did not practice for Carolina. Otherwise, every starting player was a full participant in practice. So this will be the healthiest divisional playoff match that we see this season.
All right. That'll be hopefully that'll be fun to watch. I mean, it's going to be another one of those, defensive slugouts that most people like pretend to to like because they like old school football or they like the theory of it. But I think this will be fun to watch, even for the people that pretend to like defensive games.
Is it going to be 9-7 Seattle?
Yeah, I think it's going to be. What is the over under, by the way? I bet it's like 38 or 40 or something.
Consensus is 44.
What? I take the under. I mean, I see this as a 20-18 game or something. You know, somebody has like a 2-point conversion or misses a kick. Probably 2-point conversion.
Yeah.
Or a safety. Ooh, I'd love to see a safety in this game.
Ooh, safety on Cam Newton. Break their backs right away. Seen that before.
Yep.
Looking forward to seeing Green Bay go down miserably when they are destroyed by Arizona at home.
Yeah, no, I don't see that game. I bet. So in my head, the line is more than a touchdown. In my head, the line is just over to like 8.5 points.
It opened at 7.5, but the Vegas consensus now is 7. Over under of 50.
It moved in the other direction.
Yeah, the Green Bay had a couple of players come off the injury report or participate more in practice than they were anticipated to.
I mean, the reason Green Bay did so well against Washington is because Washington didn't have an answer to no huddle. Arizona will obviously have an answer to no huddle. They're one of the most versatile defenses in the NFL, even with Tyrann Mathieu out, which is a big blow to dealing with that kind of thing. The fact that they have a safety backer in Deion Buchanan, the fact that they've got other players that are decent at the safety nickel conversion, the fact that they've got a defensive line that can play both, 2-gap and 1-gap principles at different times, the fact that they communicate well. The thing that allowed Green Bay to go off was not because they magically figured out how to play well. It's that they caught Washington off guard again and again and again, broke their packs or Washington broke their own backs a couple of times with, penalties, and it was really poor coaching throughout the game. I just don't see that in Arizona, so I'm surprised the line moved in the other direction. And obviously I'm like ranting about a game where they're a touchdown favorite, but I think it's going to be a little bit more than that because I think Green Bay is going to be more like what we've seen throughout most of the year, not what we saw last week.
Well, and if the injury report is any indication, we probably won't see too much production from their starting tight ends, limited production from Eddie Lacy, probably no Devontae Adams. So, their offense is not the high-octane monster it might have been for like 2 minutes in the season when they were playing the Vikings. And yeah, like you were saying, I mean, the Cardinals have such a versatile defense, and they're just so much better coached on offense that I am looking forward to watching them roll the Packers, probably by a lot more than 7.
Yeah. So
if the over-under is 50, I predict a score of 41-10.
That's a good way to put it.
That's where I'm at. We got a few mailbag questions left. Should we answer those and call it a show?
Yeah, I think so. I think this will provide, I think, an indication to regular listeners in Norse Code that we're transitioning to sort of off-season talk, which means our shows will seem maybe a little bit less Vikings-oriented and a little bit less substantive, but we're going to have to transition to sort of once-a-week stuff after the show, I think. So, yeah.
That's probably true, and then maybe do a couple of shows the week of the draft, maybe do like a draft special, get a couple of guests on leading up. We're not going to bomb you with 2 episodes a week of mock drafts. That's the rest of the internet's job. Come on.
And I'll probably write a couple of Viking specific mock drafts, but I can't imagine listening to one on a podcast.
Ugh. Blah. Judd Zolged's Hoodie writes, are all Packers fans inbred cow tipping pedophiles, or only 99% of them?
I've heard all, but that's just a rumor.
I have heard this rumor as well, and I have not seen enough evidence
to the contrary
to prove that it is not true.
A true skeptic, Dusty requires evidence for any extraordinary claims. For example, the 99.9% claim.
Or even just 99.
Right.
I tell you what, I could believe 100. Brendan White writes in, is Chris Ivory the perfect running mate for McKinnon next season if we trade Adrian Peterson? I think so.
Yeah, in a way,
That's Brendan, not me, who thinks that. But yeah, I'd buy that.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think Chris Ivory is the exact sort of complementary kind of runner. It sounds like, ear to the ground. The Vikings are not close to considering a possibility of a trade for Adrian, and I think that's because they know what his price point is, and he's more valuable to the Vikings than the price that they would get back. I don't know what that price is, but it sounds like to me that that's definitely not happening. And of course, given my track record of AP reporting, take that with like boulders of salt. But probably not a trade. Some of my offseason plans will include a trade, but it's probably not going to happen. But if it did, Chris Ivory, good idea. I would probably draft a running back instead of finding one in FA, but like Chris Ivory would be relatively cheap, despite being surprisingly a lot more talented than people give him credit for in the New York Jets offense, which was a good offense this year. Who knew?
I personally would rather have Adrian Peterson than another third-round draft pick. So,
well, if his price is a second-round pick, maybe that's the breaking point.
Well, we've got
is there a question about this
that we can jump off from? Is OSU wide receiver Michael Thomas going to be your Trey Waynes of the 2016 draft?
I don't hate Michael Thomas. I mean, I might, actually. I just haven't broken down any film. But I don't know. Maybe. Michael Thomas doesn't seem to be as well regarded as Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes was the top cornerback in the draft, and I didn't see why. Michael Thomas is not the top receiver in the draft, according to consensus. That's Laquan Treadwell. Some people think it's Corey Coleman, but it's mostly Laquan Treadwell. And then, some people are talking about Josh Doxson, but Michael Thomas is like maybe the fourth and fifth receiver in the discussion. So probably not. Maybe you'll like him a lot. Ted doesn't seem to think that Michael Thomas is better than these other receivers. Ted at Purple Buckeye, huge Ohio State fan as you can get from the name. And if he's not super high on this guy, I don't really see why. And that's not to say he's low on him or anything, but if he doesn't think that this dude's the top receiver in the draft, then maybe he's worth a second round pick, which is what I said about Trey Waynes, but I think it's different.
Is he worth trading Adrian Peterson away to get that second round pick so that we can draft a wide receiver?
I mean, if he does the things that successful second round picks a wide receiver do, then actually that's probably worth it in my head.
Nate Schetzel writes us with another question by email. So now that Ed Reed is a defensive backs coach for the Bills, it begs the question, are star players good coaches? Related to that, does Chad Greenway have more value next year as a $3.5 million linebacker, or could he have even more value to the team as a coach?
It kind of depends on what the nature of that relationship does in terms of like being able to relay, coaching information and tips to teammates and stuff like that. You'd make him an assistant linebacker coach, kind of like Hank Fraley is the assistant offensive line coach. Although, I guess they fired Jeff Davidson and they didn't fire Hank Fraley, so that's interesting and curious, but probably not in any meaningful way.
Well, and you know what they say, right? Those who can't do, teach.
That was going to be related to my next point about Ed Reed, but Chad Greenway could do for quite some time, so...
That's fair. He would just cost a lot of money while he was doing.
Right. But yeah, $3.5 million in whatever the new cap is going to be, that's probably fine. I had an issue with Chad Greenway at $5 million a year ago under a cap that is like $15-20 million less than this next cap that's coming up. So
yeah, it goes from like high 120s to like 150, right?
Yeah, something like that. So like $3.5 million. Yeah, I mean, why not? Rotational super sub or whatever. So yeah, I think that he could be worth it as like a zero down linebacker / super sub linebacker who, replaces in case of injury or something like that. And whatever locker room coaching bits that he provides. It's always difficult to tell because players are always complimentary of their teammates, whether or not something is true. This is most notorious with quarterbacks. I think Aaron Rodgers is maybe the only example of a player who kind of let his resentment of the starter not teaching him stuff like show through, but he even said all the right things. So it's like difficult to tell if they're actually teaching, but I suspect Chad Greenway does a pretty good job teaching people.
Bret Favre was a special case too. He's like the anti-teacher.
Exactly why I wanted to be a quarterback's coach.
I know. I imagine Aaron Rodgers is like watching the same thing. He's like, please let that guy coach. I want someone else to know my misery. Now you see what I've been dealing with all these years, he like texts.
Text Sam Bradford. Sorry, lol.
Exactly.
Can star players be good coaches? Yeah, obviously in theory they can be good coaches. Traditionally, it seems to not work out. There are some good examples of the opposite. Our own Jerry Gray, I think, is probably a pretty good example of someone who's well regarded as a defensive backs coach. And to the extent that we may have evidence of that, he is. And he was a multi-Pro Bowl defensive back. Woodson, also a pretty good example. Not Charles. Rod. A pretty good
porn star name.
Yeah, well, also a Hall of Fame.
Also a NFL Hall of Famer name.
But yeah, he I think he coached for a bit. I thought that he's still the assistant defensive backs coach at Oakland. So there's some instances, but there's been a lot of instances of even star players entering fellowship programs and kind of burning out. They're just not. They tend to not be good coaches. And a really good Rex Ryan example, I think, by Tim Graham, who is not a super popular but pretty smart reporter in the Buffalo area, talked about this. How actually Rex Ryan actually brought in, maybe it was Buddy, but A. Ryan brought in Doug Plank. The guy who the 46 defense is named after because 46 was the number of his jersey. And he lasted 1 year as a defensive, either a defensive backs coach or a defensive coordinator, but I think he's a defensive backs coach. He lasted 1 year. A lot of people were like, but this is Ed Reed. He's a Hall of Fame safety. I mean, he knows the in and outs of Rex Ryan's defense. And it's like, maybe you don't know who Doug Plank is, but they named the defense after him, so chill.
Don't worry about it. He's really good. Just get on the internet. You'll figure it out.
Right. Instead of tweeting Google. But yeah, traditionally they don't, because the things coaches do to make players good are things that they knew they couldn't do and could find out and point out. Corrections is a big part of what they do, and technique's a big part of what they do. And the reason these players are good is not necessarily because they know how to teach technique, but it's because they can A, pick up on technique, and B, incorporate that technique, all while C, using their profound intuition as players to do it appropriately. So the things that made them good are not things that are necessarily teachable. Your ability to absorb information, incorporate it, and change your practice patterns, your muscle memory, etc. That is not an indicator of your recallable knowledge of something. And specifically not an indicator of your ability to translate the knowledge that you remember in your head specifically into, something that you can coach. And so the reason that Bret Favre is so funny to me as a potential coach is because he was maybe the most intuitive player that we've seen at the quarterback position. And you actually could not coach him. That's the reason Atlanta didn't want him after a year of having him. The other reason, of course, is that he's an alcoholic. The idea that he has the ability to teach others that what he can do is maybe not profoundly disturbing, but kind of hilarious. Ed Reed was a spectacularly intelligent safety, and so he might be able to teach some of the stuff that he picked up over the years, and maybe he could be good. But just in general, a lot of things that make star players good does not make them good coaches. And I think that if they generally could be, a lot of star players would have liked to go into coaching if just for the income and being able to be around football. And you look around the coaches around the league, and it's one that rewards connections and nepotism, which all these star players should have the benefit of, and they still don't move up the coaching ranks or become coaches. The guy who just got here in Philadelphia is a backup quarterback, right? Jim Harbaugh, backup quarterback, although I guess he started for a little bit. Certainly not a star, right?
Well, yeah, because
Mike
you can get to that point being able to kind of absorb information and then also spread it around, share it with others in a concise, intelligent way, maybe without having that intuition and athleticism gap that you can't explain as well to other players. Like, I can totally see, you're right, it is so funny to think of Bret Favre as a quarterback's coach, because he'd just be standing out there in like a stained t-shirt and jeans, like yelling, "Why don't you just do it? I don't understand why you don't just do it. I've told you how to do it like 5 times. You just do it.
Just like throw it. Just throw it. Just throw it over there." It's like,
No, not like that.
Not like that. Just throw it stronger. Obviously stronger. Why would you do that?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I even tweeted this out as a fake conversation with Darren Page. Like, I'm imagining like Sam Bradford or Paxton Lynch or whoever, walking up to Bret Favre and just asking like, "Hey, am I setting my back foot too far off because my passes are sailing? And I was wondering like maybe I should tighten up my drop." And you just Bret Favre just responding with, "Feet? No, you don't throw with your feet. You throw with your arms. What the heck? What are you talking about your feet for?
Why got to worry about your feet? Your feet just do stuff, all right? Worry about your arm.
They just do
Worry
stuff.
about where you're throwing.
Why didn't you throw to him? He wasn't open. Open is just where you throw it. What?
Exactly. And suddenly communication breaks down for some reason.
You're right. Ed Reed was super intelligent and he was pretty technique sound. Kind of. Bret Favre was not very technique sound, so like maybe that's a pretty big difference. But I mean, you take a look at all these coaches, even the most successful coaches like Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, didn't even play in the NFL. So meh.
But Reed does have something of a reputation as a leader in the Ravens locker room. I mean, one of the things that was frequently said, not you specifically, about the late 2000s Ravens defense, was that there was just such a strong community in the locker room. You had Ed Reed. You had oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. It's driving me nuts. Ray Lewis. You had guys that could fire each other up and had each other's backs, and they were one of the most potent defenses in the league. And
you need way more than just like locker room leaders. Like, I'll fully acknowledge that Ed Reed can fire people up. But like,
well, maybe that can translate into being able to talk his way out of that kind of intuition and athleticism gap. Maybe it can't, but maybe he's got a better shot than Bret Favre.
Yeah, I guess I can't explain. I can't define whether or not Ed Reed will be good, but our history of examples would say that the fact that he was a star is actually not as big a benefit. I mean, Doug Plank was super intelligent. So
probably no is the answer to the question.
Well, in the sense that
if history is any indication,
probably no, most position coaches probably aren't that good anyway. Yeah,
that is fair. All right, one last question from Judd Zolgad's hoodie. If Arif is Macho Man, which by the way, phenomenal avatar.
I love it.
If Arif is Macho Man, what pro wrestler, past or present, is Dusty? Hoodie comes up with Red Rooster and Iron Mike Sharp as examples, which made me chuckle. So,
obviously, my familiarity with wrestling comes from when I was in Grand Forks. I was a kid. I was not... I talked about this like just on the last episode, too. So I know a lot of the big names. I don't know a ton of... not even just the jobbers. I just don't know a ton of the would-be contenders and stuff like that. So
my knowledge of wrestling stops at about WrestleMania 10. So that's kind of the era that
you've got a pretty deep knowledge up to that point, though, right?
I mean, because I was like 9, 10 years old. I was obsessed with wrestling, like everybody else, like that. Yeah,
right.
Sure,
right. So, like I can remember some of like the B-listers. Like I can remember like Sergeant Slaughter, right? But for the most part, the names that I'm going to come up with are like Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper. The person I came up with for you, not Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, but the person I came up with for you was Ric Flair.
I only hope that I have a career as long as Ric Flair's. That man is a master of detecting which way the wind is blowing and steering his ship to a line.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was a performer. I think that you're a pretty charismatic guy, right? I think that maybe
that's the idea.
maybe as a technical wrestler, maybe he's a little bit underrated, but it was more about sort of what he brought to the table. And being the biggest person in the room, at least from a charisma standpoint. I think he wasn't above, breaking a couple of rules. And then I think I went to the Wikipedia page of Ric Flair just to make sure I got everything right. And this description of himself is phenomenal. And I remember him saying it now that I read it, but limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, son of a gun who kissed all the girls worldwide and made them cry. I think
I want that on my tombstone.
I think the ethos of that is something that you aspire to be, Dusty.
I think I'm already 3/4 of the way there. I believe there are some girls I have not left crying.
Well, you'll get there.
I'll find them.
So who did you choose?
I had a much more obscure, lower profile choice. I like yours better, by the way. I'm going to stick with that. I can't wait for James to hear this too. I think he'll have some choice words.
For me specifically, like Arif, how could you do that? He's already got a big ego, and obviously this doesn't make any sense. He's not the nature boy.
I was going to go with Marty Jannetty, one half of the Rockers opposite Shawn Michaels before Shawn Michaels blew up in his own right.
But before Shawn Michaels became like this technical hero along with Bret Hart.
Well, they were both. So the Rockers were probably the most technical tag team of their era, like the late '80s, very early '90s. A lot of tandem stunts off the ropes, that sort of thing, and they were both.
Was he as athletic as Shawn Michaels?
Well, that was the thing, is that they were both pretty athletic, and they both had like wonderful, long, flowing, 80s hair metal hair.
Awesome.
So they made like a natural. They paired very naturally with each other, but of course Shawn Michaels proved to be a somewhat better technical wrestler and a much more magnetic personality. So once Michaels was able to go on to solo popularity, poor
become
Marty
the Heartbreak Kid.
Yeah, exactly. He went on to become the Heartbreak Kid. Marty Jannetty floated around the promotion for a little while, and now I don't know what he's doing. I haven't known what he's been doing for like 15 years. He might not even still be alive.
He's 55. He is alive, and he's not retired, actually. So I'm at his Wikipedia page because I was already at Shawn Michaels' Wikipedia page. So he'd signed with Chikara, which is an American professional wrestling promotional tour based in Philadelphia. It comes from the Japanese kanji meaning strength.
Oh, so he's like the real life version of the character that Rowdy Roddy Piper played in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Exactly. Exactly.
Perfect. I would say that is a much more accurate description of my podcaster / blogger question mark. I guess so I got roped into some discussion about which blogger could be sacrificed into a volcano. I wouldn't really call myself a blogger, but
right. Yeah, that discussion kind of overflowed from the question that Hoodie submitted like 2 days ago. So
it blew up into Twitter.
Right. So you I guess you're not a blogger, but
no. I would classify myself as an important member of the team, but nevertheless a bit player who will probably be relegated to the dustbin of Philadelphia when I have outlived my usefulness and the people around me go on to more success.
When I hit you with that sweet chin music?
Yes, when that happens. So there you go. I like the Ric Flair thing, though. That's good. That was not where I thought you were going to go with it. And it was funny because you were talking before the show about how you were specifically trying not to compare me to someone too high profile.
Right, but then I realized the only way that I could talk about somebody and maybe credibly is not the right word, but talk about somebody without sounding like I'm reading off their page because I just learned about them would be to choose
somebody you had a little bit of background knowledge about yourself.
Right, somebody that I had actually watched wrestling, right? So and my wrestling knowledge goes later in history than yours does, obviously, but it's just not as in depth. And so obviously it's you couldn't be The Undertaker, you couldn't be Triple H. I mean, those are clearly out of the question.
No, but definitely not Hulk Hogan. That would be blasphemy to.
Right. You're not Mankind.
No, I'm not Mick Foley. obviously.
Yeah, so I'm like going through all these names. It's like you're not Sting, you're not, like all of these people that you're clearly not. And so the person I could find was definitely, a showman, kind of a cheater, but everyone just kind of didn't care. I mean, people cared, but like they didn't really care.
But then he gets all up in your face and he's like, "Woo!" And you're like, "Ah."
So
initially, my choice for myself was going to be Ravishing Rick Rude, but I don't look quite enough like Freddie Mercury. And the more I thought about it, I never realized this being like 8 or 9 years old, but his character was a stripper. And
there's no
I am not a stripper. So that one went out the window in favor of a face, but definitely a face who was also a second banana.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right. What are you writing this week on Daily Norseman? 5 articles? 6 articles? 20 articles?
20 articles. No, I might write 1, possibly 2. I don't really have anything in mind. But going to be launching a new project with a couple of other people in the Vikings community. I guess it's still under wraps. We want to launch it before February, and I'm going to get to some work for that specifically. But in the meantime, probably an article to Daily Norseman. It might be one of those, off-season plan, circle jerk things.
Potentially very exciting stuff once we figure out what it is. Whatever it turns out to be, you will hear about it here first, perhaps second, on the number 1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, Norse Code. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Daily Norseman. Website, as always, norsecodepodcast.com. Daily Norseman, also a good place to get all Vikings-related updates and see the latest writings from blogger extraordinaire and useful human Arif Hassan. Follow the show on Twitter at NorseCodeDN. Arif is at Arif Hassan NFL. I am at Dusty O'Connell. Our intrepid producer James is at Big Mono, but he also operates the official Twitter account. So you can tweet us at those places as you like. Download the show on iTunes, Stitcher. We had another weird issue with podcast aggregators this week. So if you're going to use one, I strongly recommend you use iTunes, because it seems like if we have to go back and change a file, it updates to iTunes the fastest, and Stitcher can sometimes take a day or more, which I know is like an eternity for football fans, especially now in the hot moment-to-moment swirling atmosphere of playoffs and coaching changes and all that jazz. In fact, we thought about only doing 1 show this week, but we eventually decided that so much of the content would be like deprecated by the time the show came out, or in the intervening week before we did another show, that we resolved to bring you more of the content you love best. So here it is. Enjoy your playoff preview, replete with gambling advice and Bret Favre mockery.
Remember, the opinions in the show should not be constituted as gambling advice.
Exactly. Please obey all local laws. It's whatever the current mishmash of local gaming law is. Just do your best to abide by that.
Exactly.
And so that'll do it for episode 116 of Norse Code. Our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this: we go out, we hit people in the mouth.